Speed Duels are an alternate Yu-Gi-Oh format with its card pull. It's meant to be like Duel Links but in real life, with less zones, starting life points, skills, and etc. But while Duel Links has tons of cards these days, including Link monsters, Speed Duels are much farther behind, only having fusions as the extra deck mechanic. And in this video, we're going to be going over some of the cards which were really good in Speed Duels, but not really anywhere else. And at number 10, we have Eradicating Aerosol. This is a spell card which just destroys all insect-type monsters on the field. While this may seem like an extremely targeted side deck card, Aerosol actually saw play in main decks during really early Speed Duel formats, as one of the best generic removal options around. This is all thanks to the skill, Hidden Parasite, which can turn all monsters in the field into insects until the end of the turn, but it halves all battle damage your opponent takes until the end of the turn as well, and it can only be used up to twice per duel. Early Speed Duels were extremely lacking in most forms of removal, with most decks having to resort to battle traps to deal with opponents' monsters. We're not even talking about something like Sakuretsu Armor, which the game hasn't received to this day, but rather about positioning changes like Kunai with Chained and Windstorm of Vet Aqua. This, coupled with the fact that there weren't very many good generic skills around yet, made players perfectly content with wasting their skill slot to play a way worse version of Darkhold in their deck. Way later into the game's lifespan, there was an insect deck that rose to the tier 1 prominence, but by then there were so many more options that this card did not see a resurgence. While it may not be a staple anymore, its relevance in the first few Speed Duel formats all the way back in 2019 at least earns it the 10th spot on this list. And at number 9, we have Serpent Night Dragon. This is a level 7 vanilla Dark Dragon monster with 2350 attack and 2400 defense. It may be somewhat surprising that a low-statted, high-level vanilla monster like this actually saw play in any format, considering it even has lower attack than the original Dark Magician somehow, but this card was fortunate enough to have an entire strategy built around it in Speed Duels. This is not because people were lacking in monster options to have to play it, but rather because it had its own associated skill, Nightmare Sonic Blast. This skill could only be activated while you controlled specifically Serpent Night Dragon, and it could, once per turn, excavate the top 4 cards of your deck and apply an effect depending on how many monsters you found there. If it was 1, you got to add it to your hand. If it was 2, you could pop a card your opponent controls. And if it was 3 or more, you would do both. As if the free +1 effect wasn't good enough on its own, it could also be used to fix your next top deck, since after excavating you get to put the cards back in any order. The pot was also overwhelmingly difficult to deal with, since skills cannot be responded to in Speed Duels, so your opponent couldn't even flip their cards in response to it. A Serpent Night Dragon on the field threatened to swing the game around by a lot if it managed to stick around in the field. Its decks focused entirely on turboing it out with cards like Double Coscon to bring it out with 1 tribute, and Blue Dragon Summoner to search it out. This crappy vanilla actually ended up being one of the scariest strategies in the earliest days of the game due to all the support around it. And coming at number 8, we have Raging Flame Sprite. This is a level 3 monster with 100 attack, which can attack your opponent directly, and when it inflicts battle damage like that, it gains 1000 attack permanently. As one of the best direct attackers in the format, Flame Sprite had an entire deck built around it in Crystal Beast Amethyst Cat, which can also attack directly, but when it does so, any battle damage is halved. Raging Cat, as it was called, used Room for Growth, which increased the attack of a level 3 or lower monster you control by 300 times its level until the end of the turn. With that skill, Raging Flame Sprite and Amethyst Cat could hit for 1000 and 1050 damage through any bodies your opponent might have. This might still sound unimpressive for the regular game, but it's important to note that you only have 4000 life points in Speed Duels, so this is an extremely fast clock. Even more so if you ever manage to get Raging Flame Sprite's effect off. By coupling these 2 cards that deal with monsters permanently, such as Floodgate Trap Hole and Wall of Disruption, or which can protect you for a whole turn like Wabaku, these decks could get wins really quickly by just poking directly 4 times. All of this defense, coupled with the mostly hard to access means of removal in Speed Duels, made this into quite a threat, to the point where some people were siding in Possessed Dark Spirit, which contributed itself to steal all level 3 or lower monsters your opponent controls, to completely flip the table in the Raging Cat matchup. And coming to number 7, we have Zombina. This is a level 4 Earth zombie monster whose only effect is that when it's destroyed by your opponent, it can reborn another level 4 or lower monster in your graveyard. This card was released all the way into the Link era of the TCG and went together with Zombina as a couple of cute pack filler cards that reference each other. However, this pair would be separated when it came to Speed Duels, as a 2K vanilla is something that still hasn't quite been put into this version of the game yet. While Zombina came out far too late to see play in the TCG, it was present in Speed Duels for a really long time, letting it see play in a variety of decks since. It has serviceable stats at 1400 attack and 1500 defense, it has a floating effect that's extremely hard to get around due to the lack of non-destruction removal. It saw play in many of the early good stuff decks of the meta, which could bring back their Yomi ship for repeated uses, or a beater which had been destroyed. When the meta expanded, this card was even an essential part of a new strategy, Rat Toolbox. These decks were centered around Giant Rat, which can float into countless utility monsters, and of course Zombina, which can then float into Giant Rat for what's essentially an endless supply of bodies. These decks also got to abuse Haunted Shrine, which is a double reborn for zombie-type monsters, when called a Haunted is still deemed far too good as a generic revival spell to be put into the game yet. And at number 6, we have Destiny End Dragoon. This is a level 10 Dark Warrior monster with 3000 attack and defense, which must be made with Destiny Hero Plasma and Dogma. Once per turn, it can target and destroy a monster that your opponent controls, and then burn your opponent for its attack value if it was face up, but you can't enter the battle phase the turn you activate this effect. It also comes back during the standby phase if it was in the graveyard if you banish another Destiny Hero monster from the grave. While Destiny Hero Plasma was actually quite relevant to the TCG quite a few times, its counterpart Dogma and the associated fusions between the two pretty much saw no play, until they released its Speed Duels. This card reads like Destroyer Phoenix Enforcer from around 20 years ago, and that was enough to make it into one of the most formidable boss monsters in Speed Duels. Still, Dragoon Turbo decks didn't have anything like a Fusion Destiny to bring it out with materials, but rather it had to rely on a hard draw for both materials and then using the polymerization skill to bring it out. Needless to say, this was quite a bricky strategy, considering your best card and basically only available card for consistency was Allure of Darkness, even if you're only working with a 20 card deck. Still, this deck was around for a while, but ultimately fell off with time and changed the Fusion Party skill, which made it no longer once per duel and gave it a discard cost to compound the minus you go for a Fusion Summon even harder. And at number 5, we have Absorbing Jar. This is a level 3 rock flip monster, which when flip face up, destroys all set spell and traps in the field, and then each player draws a card for every one of the cards that was destroyed this way. After resolving the effect, you also cannot set cards until the end of the turn. After the first set of incredibly busted Jar monsters, Konami never really printed any good ones ever again, and the Jar series of monsters became exclusive to joke cards and pack filler. And this was definitely supposed to be the case for Absorbing Jar, but in the Speed Duel format, this is pretty much the only form of mass back row removal. While this card can make you minus pretty badly while doing so, and is also quite slow as it's a flip monster, there's just nothing like a Trune in the format which can really fill the same niche. Though it's also really important to note that since Speed Duels has no main phase 2, this will actually deal with all the cards your opponent set for the turn if they attack into it, even if you're likely to go -3 in the process. This card saw play in Cyber Angels, the only strategy which could capitalize on lack of back row to kill your opponent before the plus mattered. Well, as long as they didn't draw into a Sphere Karibo anyway. Even if they didn't have Dakini, which was what made the deck truly busted in Tier 0 in Duel Links, they had Cyber Angel and Zana and a pretty good skill, and this was enough to make them into one of the few decks around that could actually OTK. And for number 4, we have Golden Ladybug. This is a level 1 insect monster which can reveal itself in your hand during the standby phase to make you gain 500 life points. Life gain cards are pretty much never good, and aren't really something you expect to see play in any format outside of Scumming Winds if there's a time limit. Still, the slowness of this format and the cards surrounding the meta have led to this card being played in both main and side deck through time. Golden Ladybug matches up really well against one of the best cards available in Speed Duel, Nightmare Wheel. This is one of the best generic traps for stopping attacks permanently, but was also one of the main win cons of burn strategies with its 500 damage every turn, which Golden Ladybug negates by itself. But outside of a counter to burn, this card was also great in decks that use the Twisted Personality skill. The original version of the skill gained a counter every time a player lost life points, and could then, once per turn, remove 2 counters to discard a random card from your opponent's hand, or 3 to destroy a face-up card they control. This was one of the strongest generic skills available for a long time, leading to many decks being built around it. Usually, life gain cards aren't good because it doesn't matter if you have an extra turn if you're not actually advancing your board state. But Twisted Personality will let you leverage the extra life into an actual tangible advantage by gaining counters. Even after the skill was nerfed to only gain counters when you lose life points and not either player, Golden Ladybug still found itself a place in Volcanic decks, one of the best strategies of the current meta, since they need to pay exactly 500 life points for Volcanic Shell's graveyard effect. And coming in at number 3, we have Charging Gaia the Fierce Knight. This is a level 7 warrior with 2300 attack. It can be normal summon without tributing, in which case its original attack becomes 1900. If it is tributed, you can add a Blackluster Soldier monster from your deck to your hand. Charging Gaia made itself relevant by being one of the best beaters around. It came out somewhat early in the game's lifespan, but saw itself passed over for Blade Knight in most good stuff decks, since Blade Knight could get 100 attack higher than Charging Gaia if you had a single card in your hand. However, we would later get a new skill which made this into the best normal summon of the format. Beatdown can only be activated if you control a level 5 or higher monster. It makes your monsters gain 300 attack for each level 5 or higher monster you control. As the best high-level beater which can be normal summoned, Charging Gaia became the center point of this deck, which took the meta by storm. By playing Cyber Dragon in this card, you could easily bulldoze through your opponent's life points with beatdown boosts as they're each hitting for almost lethal by themselves. This deck is just staggeringly consistent at what it does, even if its game plan isn't very complicated, and has plenty of room for cards like Drillroid and Dust Tornado to stop whatever could deal with your threats. This is the best Speed Duel deck around at the moment, and this probably won't change before we get either new releases or skill changes. And at number 2, we have Parasite Paranoid. This is a level 2 insect monster which can, as a quick effect, equip itself to a monster on the field. A monster equipped with this card becomes an insect, cannot attack insects, and also has effects that target insects monsters negated. If this equipped card is sent to the graveyard, you can special summon a level 7 or higher insect monster from your hand, ignoring its summoning conditions. This card enabled one of the strongest decks in Speed Duel history, Moth, which dominated the game for far more time than it should have. By using the Cocoon of Ultra Evolution, you can tribute an opponent's monster equipped with Paranoid to bring out perfectly ultimate Great Moth from the deck. Moth decks were extremely hard to deal with, as even if you managed to remove the equip by doing something like flipping your monster face down with the Book of Moon, you were still risking getting hit with the Moth anyways due to its graveyard effect. A 3500 beater would be obnoxious enough to deal with on its own in a slow format, but having it be removal on top just made it so that for a long time, your deck was either Moth or trying to beat Moth. If you had a single monster out, your opponent could just Paranoid to get rid of it, and then get their boss, and then normal summon anything to lethal you. It's important to recall that not only are skill cards spell speed 4, they also, for a really long time, did not have a response window after their activation. Essentially, this meant that after bringing out your huge beater from the deck, your opponent would not get an opportunity to respond with an on-summon effect like Floodgate Trap Hole. Ultimately, this card would only drop in usage when they changed skills to actually give the opponent a chance to respond on resolution, as well as a big nerf on the Cocoon skill itself, which made it so you weren't able to normal or special other monsters during the turn you used the skill. And last, at number 1, we have Zoma the Spirit. This is a continuous trap card which can special summon itself as a trap monster with 1800 attack and 500 defense and defense position. Then, if it gets beaten over by battle, your opponent takes burn damage equal to the attack of the monster who destroyed it. Zoma was by far the biggest problem in Speed Duels for ages, and when they did eventually start putting out a ban list for the format, this card was put to 1 instantly. This may not look like much for any TCG or even Duel Links players, but Zoma shifted the format like nothing else and was extremely obnoxious to play against. The burn damage potential of this card is immense in a 4K life point format. To make matters worse, it actually has really good attack for the format too. So if you ever manage to flip it into attack position, your opponent's not going to be able to beat over it without a beater giving up nearly half their life points. Couple this with how this is one of the few good free special summons around, and this card was a 3-0 staple in every deck for a really long time. One of the things Moth decks feared the most was getting their OTK chump blocked by Zoma coming out, as if they didn't have some way to deal with it right then and there, they could proceed to crash into it and your Moth would burn for lethal if you'd taken any damage beforehand. This card being a thing led to most decks having to play Breaker the Magical Warrior and Dust Tornado just to deal with it. Having to stare down a Zoma while on low life points was extremely oppressive, and you can't even just turtle up in defense with no worries since it's also a quite good beater by itself. Even now with this card at 1 and this game using Duel Links like ban lists where you can only have 1 limited card in your deck total, most people will still have their 1 card be Zoma over anything else. There's no other card that people have wanted out of the format more than Zoma the Spirit, despite it being nearly useless everywhere else. And that's why it easily makes the first spot on this list. Alright, and that's the list. If you happen to know of any other cards you might have missed, or have any ideas for future videos just like this one, please let us know down in the comments below.